Hello, welcome back to Human Sexuality. We're going to be talking this week about gender dysphoria and gender incongruence. My name is Robin Matthey. We're still in spring 2023. This is week 3. Before we go on, to kind of get you titillated a little about what we're talking about this week, I want to ask you, what sex are you? And how do you know? I think it's important to think about that because a lot of times people who are not gender dysphoric or gender nonconforming really don't even think about it. They give it no thought, no consideration. But for kids who are, and adults who have gender dysphoria or gender incongruence, they think about it a lot. It's a significant part of their lives. And because we're all mental health professionals, or some of you are becoming mental health professionals, it's important to know that. The learning objectives this week are to identify diagnostic criteria for gender dysphoria in the Diagnostics and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. We call that the DSM. And we'll be paying attention to developmental differences. There are diagnostic criteria that differ significantly for children versus adolescents and adults. That's also true for the ICD. They call it gender incongruence. We'll look at the gender, the criteria for that as well. And again, developmentally, there is a significant difference between children and adolescents and adults. Then we're going to talk a little bit, we'll probably sprinkle that throughout our discussion, about the similarities and differences in the DSM and the ICD. It's important that we understand the differences because we live in an increasingly globalized society. There are many cultural differences, and we want to be good global citizens. So pay attention to what the World Health Organization refers to, the ICD and the diagnostic criteria for gender incongruence. So let's talk now about the essence of the current diagnosis for gender dysphoria as opposed to gender incongruence in the ICD. We'll focus on that next. I'm quoting from the DSM. Individuals with gender dysphoria have a marked incongruence between the gender to which they have been assigned, usually based on phenotypic sex at birth, referred to as birth-assigned gender, and their experienced or expressed gender. And this discrepancy is the core component of the diagnosis. There must be evidence of distress about this incongruence. 2 major points here. First, the DSM refers to birth-assigned gender, and that is really an error for those of us who have spent our lives studying human sexuality. Sex is biological. We use it to define biology. Gender refers to masculinity, femininity, androgyny, one's identity as a man, woman, or neither. So that's an important distinction. The other thing I'd like to draw your attention to is the importance of having evidence of distress about the incongruence. So you can have all of the other criterion, like most diagnoses in the DSM. The absence of distress means one does not qualify for the diagnosis. That's important because a lot of people who are identifying as transgender or who identify as gender nonconforming do not experience distress. And so we have to be very careful that someone who comes into our office saying, I think I'm transgender and I'm not sure what to do about that we don't immediately assume that they have gender dysphoria. We want to explore how distressed they feel about that. It may be that they just need supportive therapy to help them adjust to being transgender rather than feeling that the distress is about their gender identity per se. So in the ICD, the essence of the current diagnosis is, and quoting again, gender incongruence is characterized by a marked and persistent incongruence between an individual's experienced gender and their assigned sex. And again, notice that the ICD refers to assigned sex, not assigned gender. Gender variant behavior and preferences alone are not a basis for assigning the diagnosis in this group. And again, that is really important distinction for clinicians, because we don't want to misdiagnose someone who is transgender as gender dysphoric. Sometimes that can even have an iatrogenic effect, meaning it has an inappropriate and unnecessary adverse effect. If a person starts thinking that they're gender dysphoric, they may start thinking, I need surgery or I need hormones to fix this, which is not appropriate for people who, at least not until adulthood, identify as transgender or gender nonconforming. So now we're going to look at the developmental aspects. There are, as I mentioned earlier, that there are significant differences between diagnosing a child versus an adolescent or adult. The criteria are extremely different. That's also true for the ICD, but let's first focus on the DSM-5. In children, there must be a marked incongruence between one's experienced expressed gender and their assigned gender. Again, should be assigned sex, but I'll keep harping on that. The duration must be for at least 6 months. Duration, that is important because, a kiddo might come in and say, I'm not sure if I'm a boy or a girl. And an appropriate question for a clinician then is, how long have you been feeling this way? If it hasn't been 6 consistent months, they don't meet the criteria. And we want to take a watch and see attitude, and we want to be sure that it's 6 consistent months. Otherwise, it's an indication that they're probably transgender and not gender dysphoric per se. Although the research shows that it can change. Still, we want to be sure. And so we take 6 months. And that is manifested by 6 of 8 criteria. One of the criteria has to be A1, and the DSM states that is a strong desire to be of the other gender. It should be another gender, or an insistence that one is the other gender, or some alternative gender different from one's assigned gender. And B, the condition is associated with clinically significant distress or impairment in social, school, or other important areas of functioning, such as not getting along with people on their athletic team. So again, the clinically significant distress is a critical aspect of making a diagnosis. All right, let me pause here for just a minute and make sure that I'm going at an appropriate speed for you. Am I going too fast, too slow? Let me know via the chat, and I can adjust my speed to fit your needs and preferences. Feel free to earn your extra credit, and that's entirely up to you. Earn some extra credit by writing an extra essay on this week. I read everything. I give feedback. And again, it can be in any way you want. It can be written, acting, video, playing music, whatever fits for you. Let's actually stop here. We're kind of getting close to the end of our period here. So we've talked about a lot of aspects of gender identity in the ICD and the DSM, how they differ, the differences developmentally that we haven't gotten to talk about yet, the difference in gender differences, and we've really focused on the need for distress about the diagnosis or the distress in the experience. And that is absolutely essential to make a diagnosis. Thank you. I'll see you after break.